Professor Yaakob Ibrahim, Professor of Engineering, Singapore Institute of Technology, SIT, Advisor to the President of SIT and Professor in Practice at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Dr. Pervez Amir Ali Hoodboy, Founder Director of the Black Hole Islamabad, and former Chairman and Professor at the Department of Physics, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, Associate Professor Mazna Muhammad, Head of the Department of Malay Studies, NUS, High Commissioners of Malaysia and Pakistan, honorable guests, esteemed alumni, university lecturers, and friends, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Liana Nashita, and I'm honored to be your MC for the event this morning. Salam sejahtera kepada semua, and a very warm welcome to everyone in the audience and on Zoom on this special occasion today as we commemorate the 5th Syed Hussein Alatas Memorial Lecture. This year is the second year we return to an in-person event after the exceptional few years of battling with COVID-19, and we are still battling with it today. This annual memorial lecture commemorates Syed Hussein Alatas's remarkable scholarship and the vast contribution he has made to the intellectual life within and outside the university. The event today is not merely commemorative in nature, but it is also a way in which we bring to light again his important ideas and contributions and discuss what are its relevance and usefulness in today's context. This year, we are delighted to have Dr. Pervez Amir Ali Hoodboy, Founder Director of the Black Hole Islamabad, to deliver the 5th memorial lecture entitled Islam, Science, and the Quest for Modernity in the 21st Century. But before that, allow me to invite Associate Professor Mazna Muhammad, Head of the Department of Malay Studies, NUS, to officiate today's event with her welcoming remarks. Prof. Mazna, please.
Good morning, everyone, especially to our distinguished guest and presenter or lecturer for this morning's event, Professor Pervez Hoodboy. I welcome you I extend you a warm welcome to the National University of Singapore. I'm the head of department of Malay Studies, who is the I would say the auspices under which this distinguished lecture is being held today. I extend a very warm welcome to my respected colleagues here, our graduate students, our undergraduates, the NUS community, distinguished guests from Foreign High Commission, particularly the Pakistani and the Malaysian High Commission. So thank you again for being here. Some of you are familiar with this annual event, and we're so happy that you continue to support us for this. It is a 5th memorial lecture, so we've been having this 5 times straight in a row. I think we even had it during COVID, maybe save for 2020. That we skipped it, but last year we also had a very successful memorial lecture series. We had fewer guests online last year, but we had a lot of people following the lecture online. Today we are delighted that there are more physical participants today, as well as several hundreds who are following this event online. So thank you again. Now I would like to first start by thanking the organizing committee, who is chaired by Professor Syed Farid Alatas here, and of course Professor Ibrahim Yaakob has been also the backbone, you see, of this organizing committee, and of course Associate Professor Nur Aisha Abdurrahman. Not only is she a member of the committee, but she was actually the originator and the conceptualizer of the idea for this memorial lecture. The other two members who have served the committee very well, Encik Idris, Surati, and Dr. Noel Sharil. All of them have worked so hard to come to where we are today. So as Liana has kind of reminded us, this lecture series is to honor the work of the late Professor Syed Hussein Alatas, who was the head of the Department of Malay Studies. Now, he was not only a brilliant scholar, but a very impactful public intellectual. So I think the combination of the two would really, I mean, he's so much deserving, you see, of this remembrance. And what better way to remember the late Professor Syed Hussein Alatas than to have this annual series in which we reiterate some of his concerns. Now, I just want to, a small quote from him, probably was aired or written in the 1970s. So Professor Alatas said, quote, "All great movements of modernization and development have been started by man's vision of the future and inflamed by the fire of optimistic idealism," unquote. However, he also questioned the elites, while they understand, appreciate, promote science and technology, and retain suitable technocrats, they should not blindly embrace westernization. So I think that's, in that very short and pithy quote, the spirit of today's talk, you see, is going to be delivered. I also want to kind of give pay homage to our alumni in a way, because they've been very instrumental in supporting the Department of Malay Studies. So, for example, one of the most active, supporters of our Malay Studies is Mr. Imran Muhammad Taib, who says that, well, Professor Hootboy, this is a tribute to you. Professor Hootboy stands as a voice of reason. His willingness to critique ideological attempts to subsume science under dogma is ultimately a service to Muslim thought. Without it, Muslims will slide further into obscurantism that is marked by a string of balderdash and quackery as observed in contemporary Malay society, unquote. Thank you, Imran, for that very profound words. There's so many of our alumni who have also paid tribute and given their support for this lecture today. So, for example, Mr. Ibrahim Hassan said that, quote, "Early Muslims made many significant inroads in science and technology because they had a good appreciation of Islam's true spirit of learning, openness, and critical thinking," unquote. Mr. Zahidi Abdurrahman said that recently there have been a lot of false scientific claims and pseudoscience with Islam, which went viral. The callous and lackadaisical attitude towards science makes a mockery of Islam and our belief in God. Alienation from science will jeopardize our belief, unquote. So I think those are very wonderful words, you see, that, as I say, will be very fitting and a great justification of why we have such an eminent speaker to speak to that concern. So going by these sentiments and opinions, this is where the annual Syed Hussein Alatas Memorial Lecture, such as today's, can provide invaluable opportunity for reflection and dialogue from outstanding and engaged voices. In this atmosphere, we are, of course, again, truly and extremely honored to have one of the Muslim world's most prominent scientists, Professor Pervez Amirali Hootboy, to continue this tradition of intellectual engagement around the iconic ideas, activity, and legacy of the late Syed Hussein Alatas. In this regard, let me also thank our benefactor, the Jalil Foundation, which made it possible to convene this lecture series on an unbroken, almost, okay, maybe except for 1 year, an unbroken annual basis for the 5th time. So we are really, really thankful for that support. I would also like to especially thanks Professor Yaakob Ibrahim, for playing such a pivotal role in securing the foundation support for this lecture series, and of course his continuing role in seeing through the success of this event every year, including to this year's event, in which he will be playing a very important role as a moderator of the talk later on. Although I have mentioned Associate Professor Nur Aisha's name before, I also want to thank her again because she has devoted her time and energy very passionately to the success of this memorial lecture. So thank you, Aisha. You've done a great service to the department, and of course, we hope that this lecture series will continue for decades and decades. Okay. Farid, thank you very much for chairing the organizing committee, and of course to the alumni office of the Shaw Foundation building, which we are in today. I really thank them for providing us this splendid, auditorium, befitting of the importance of the talk today. Once again, Professor Hutboy, of course, we will thank you after your speech, but before even that, I would really thank you for being here. And finally, my heartfelt appreciation to everyone here again, and I trust that all of us together will have a thought-provoking and stimulating time in this lecture. So let's put our hands together, to welcome Professor Hutboy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Mazna. Indeed, the title today is interesting and also relevant for today's society, as Prof. Mazna has quoted a few words from our alumni earlier. However, before the lecture begins, we would like to invite Dr. Azhar Ibrahim, Senior Lecturer in the Malay Studies Department, to recite a syair. And this syair is titled Syair Meneguh Ilmu, or in English, the rhymed poem of affirming science. Dr. Azhar, please.
Thank you, Liana. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start the lecture, this is not a literary expose, I wouldn't want to do that, but the syair that I've written last week, actually, and this is the 5th time for the lecture, and I really enjoy very much writing syair when I'm very much in stress, because it gives me, that avenue to, to express myself. Syair Meneguh Ilmu. Syair is one of our traditional classical Malay poem, which is have evolved in this region since maybe 14th, 15th century. And Hamzah Fansuri, a mystic from Aceh, was known to the person who's the mystic who started the syair tradition in the region. Let me read now. I will only read the Malay version, and there's a translated one. Forgive me if the translation doesn't comes very well, because it's very difficult to translate classical Malay. All right, let me begin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Tuan-puan hadirin terhormat, mula pertama diucap selamat dengan bismillah iringan kalimat, moga majlis tambah berkat. Syair dilantun penyeri majlis biar terakam kenangan manis. Mendengarkan kuliah ilmu berbaris, agama dan ilmu yang wajar ditulis. Kita berhimpun kali kelima, kuliah Alatas kembali segera. Tradisi ilmu berbagi sama, itulah matlamat jabatan kita. Di hari penuh bahagia, penuh berkatan, ilmuwan gunawan dari Pakistan, Profesor Parviz Hutboy kita alu-alukan kuliahkan disampai kita nantikan. Prof, sorry for your name, yeah, the spelling, yeah. Pengajian Melayu itulah jabatan, meneroka lama soal pemodenan. Alatas menulis kritikan dan seruan, kemajuan berfikir asas handalan. Fikiran semu jangan diramu, banyaklah sudah terjerumus buntu. Membilang diri syumul dan mutu, rupanya gagasan jumud dan beku. Membangun sains dihormati akal, itulah ilmu yang juga bekal. Kepada umat pengetahuan cekal, barulah modernisasi terbangun kekal. Ilmu di barat terbangun padu, sikap rasional hormati ilmu. Peradaban Islam pernah melalu, gemilangan ilmu terdahulu maju. Lihatlah Meiji membuka negeri, samurai memimpin ambil peduli. Bangsa Jepun harus ungguli, ke pelusuk dunia ilmu dicari. Di dunia Islam sama semangat, pemikir ulung mahu mengangkat. Sains dan ilmu penyuluh jagat, ijtihad ilmu juga ibadat. Jamaluddin Al-Afghani bersemangat filsafat, diserukan berulang kepada umat. Kemajuan itu harus bermatlamat, bangunkan fikiran, membuang kurafat. Sejak zaman Munshi Abdullah, diajak berfikir janganlah tengadah. Kapal asap berlayar megah, kerana teknologi pelayaran berubah. Hari ini tantangan merancu, anti sains digendang di Palu. Banyak berhujah merapu merayu, banyak diperdaya, banyak ditipu. Inilah cabaran terharus peduli, ilmu semu dan karut makin menjadi. Terpanggil kita sama sedari, hidup sejahtera tuntutan akli. Moga kuliah menyonsong ingatan, wacana Alatas dibaca lagian. Ilmu dan agama sama beratan, usah dilindung angkara bebalan. Tuan-puan, izinkan saya menyematkan syair ini dengan pantun. Normally we end syair with a pantun, just a type for this rhyme poem. And this is a pantun, this is not syair anymore. Kapal asap berlayar muara, kota selat menjadi riuh. Kian banyak hidup sejahtera, hasilnya ilmu dibangun teguh. And if you see the translation, I can only do two, because the other two is impossible. Yeah? Kota selat menjadi riuh sebab banyak kolot dan jahil. Kemajuan umat harus ditempuh agar marwah tidak terkepil. Sebab banyak kolot dan jahil, itulah bala hancurnya umat. Ilmuwan bestari, ayolah tampil. Jumud dan sangar harus disekat. Tuan-puan, cukuplah sudah, segan saya berpanjangan madah. Ayuh kita ikuti ceramah kuliah, berkat dan doa kita menadah. Terima kasih, sekianlah syair saya Azhar Ibrahim berkalam akhir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azhar. Indeed, I think everyone here was moved by his syair. So students of Malay Studies here in Auditorium and also at home, please, we have homework to do. Not only academic essays, but we need to learn from Dr. Azhar how to transfer that in syair form, yeah? Okay, so now we have come to the much-awaited memorial lecture, which will be delivered by Dr. Pervez Amirali Hoodboy. For everyone's information, this lecture is presently viewed by audience on Zoom as well. This lecture will be followed by a question and answer session. And since this is a hybrid format, we will be taking questions from the floor and also from Zoom. So for those who are tuning in online, you may also send your questions as the lecture is being delivered via the Q&A function on Zoom. We would now like to invite Dr. Pervez Amirali Hoodboy to deliver his lecture. Dr. Hoodboy, please.
I have to override the MC. Privilege of a former minister. Professor Hoodboy, I can't do poetry, but I can do a short speech. I hope that's all right with you. I'm here to introduce the speaker, and when I got his CV, it was very, very impressive. So he said it's a very short CV, and you can edit it further. I tried this morning, again with the help of my wife, I couldn't do it, basically. So I just have to repeat everything that you've given us. He's a graduate of MIT for all his degrees, bachelor's, master's, and PhD, which he obtained in 1978 in the area of nuclear physics. And he has remained an active contributor in that space since, being a sponsor of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a member of the Permanent Monitoring Panel of the World Federation of Scientists, and the founder director of the Iqbal Ahmad Center for Public Education. Since 1998, he's also headed a publishing book called Mashal Books in Lahore, in which he leads a major translation effort to produce books in Urdu that promote modern thought, human rights, and the emancipation of women. In terms of his teaching experiences, 47 years of teaching physics at the Quaid-i-Azam University in Lahore, and during that period, he was also involved in many other universities. He was, for example, a distinguished professor of physics and mathematics at the Forman Christian College University in Lahore. He was a visiting professor at his alma mater in MIT, Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and the University of Maryland. And he was also a postdoc research fellow at the University of Washington. You've heard in 2022, which is this year, he founded the Black Hole. All right? You can think about it, but we can ask him later what this is all about. But according to the write-up, it's a community space in Islamabad dedicated to the pursuit of science, art, and culture. And during the interim, when we discussed about the black hole, he says you can enter from one side of the universe and you can exit to the other side. But nobody has done that before. Maybe one of us will one day. Eh? Given such a prestigious life, I'm sure he has many awards, some of which are recorded here. In 1968, for example, he won the Baker Award for Electronics. In 1984, the prestigious Abdus Salam Prize for Mathematics. And you know, Abdus Salam was a professor of physics in Pakistan and one of the 3 Muslim Nobel laureates. One is a Turkish, one is an Egyptian, one is a Pakistani. Inshallah, the next one will be a Malay. In 2003, he was awarded the UNESCO Kalinga Prize for the popularization of science, and in 2010, he received the Joseph A. Burton Award from the American Physical Society and the Jean Mayer Award from Tufts University. In 2011, he was included in the list of the 100 most influential global thinkers by the Foreign Policy magazine. And 2013-2017, he was a member of the United Nations Secretary General Advisory Board on Disarmament Affairs. 2019, he received an honorary Doctor of Law degree from the University of British Columbia. Given all that background, you must know that he has written a lot, but one of his most famous publications, which I'm sure half of the people, maybe everybody in this room would have read, is a book on Islam and Science, Religious Orthodoxy and the Battle for Rationality, which was published in 1990, but translated into 8 languages. He's currently writing another book on Pakistan, Origins, Identity and Future, and is apparently with the publisher, so we look forward to that. And being a public intellectual, he has appeared on many, many platforms, including Pakistani TV channels, to give his views on politics and social issues. He's also a social activist against nuclear weapons in South Asia. He has written and spoken extensively about the abolition of nuclear weapons. And not only that, he has produced documentary films, including titles like Pakistan and India Under the Nuclear Shadow, and Crossing the Lines, Kashmir, Pakistan, and India. So after all that CV, we have to ask, why did we invite Professor Pervez to this lecture? So being part of the committee, we debated, and if you look back, the late Professor Syed Alatas, whom all of us knew very well, has always stressed the need to learn modern sciences that can help with the development and upliftment of our society towards progress. But more importantly, it's about an outlook and a state of mind that is rational and scientific in the pursuit of a better and just society. And Prof. Alatas quoted extensively from the Quran, often to show that there's no conflict between science and religion, and that Islam promotes the scientific outlook and its constant invitation to ponder on the wonders of the universe and the world around us. So Professor Hoodboy shares this outlook, and his works and his writings have added to the extensive writings and literature of Muslim reformists who have called upon Muslims to imbibe the scientific and rational outlook. With a brief introduction, let us all put our hands together to invite Professor Hoodboy to deliver his lecture. Professor Hoodboy, please.
Thank you. I am awed by this very warm welcome. Thank you, Professor Mazna. Thank you, Professor Yaqub. And a very good morning and salam to all of you here in the audience. I must say, I'm a little taken aback because I'm just a nuclear physicist and I've been asked to comment, to give this memorial lecture in honor of one of the greatest sociologists that this part of the world has produced. It's a half-century ago that Professor Hussein Alatas wrote his wonderful book. It was called The Myth of the Lazy Native. It was truly a path breaker, and it actually preceded Orientalism by Edward Syed by a full year or so. Both had the same outlook in the sense that both wanted to break the existing myths of that time, the misrepresentation of native populations by colonizing powers. And that myth had to be broken. That myth had to be created in the first place to justify colonialism, the burden of the white man who had to reform all of humanity by colonizing it. And so this was, in a sense, a unique work of that time. Well, like Edward Syed and Iqbal Ahmed, Hussein Alatas was a sociologist, a man who studied society. But a lot of people study society. After all, Samuel Huntington and Bernard Lewis also studied society, and they studied it very well. But Hussein Alatas, Iqbal Ahmed, Edward Syed, these are people who had empathy with the people they were studying, whether they were Malays or Javanese or Filipinos or Palestinians. These are people who had suffered and whose history, whose culture had to be understood and placed in context before academic scrutiny could be made. Well, today my lecture is on modernity and the Muslim world, and not everybody loves modernity. There are people who want to go back to the past, and people who think that modernity is an imposition and that we'd all be better off without modernity. There are quite a number of such people in the world, and very many in my own country, Pakistan. But so far as I know, I have not met anyone who's willing to have his or her tooth pulled out without anesthesia. And anesthesia, like all other modern medicines, is a product of modernity. It's a product of science. Nobody wants to communicate sending smoke signals. They'd rather use their cell phone. They wouldn't want to travel on camels or horses. They'd much prefer cars. And so there's no doubt that our modern civilization, which we enjoy and which sustains us, is the product of modern science. The current situation of Muslims in this regard is not a very good one. And of course, before us, there is the United States, Europe, Russia, China, India. And if you look at their contributions to science and you compare it with the current contributions of Muslims to science and to technology, well, things don't look good at all. In fact, one doesn't even have to look that far, doesn't have to look at the United States. All you have to do is look at Israel, a country of 9 million people. The amount of science and technology that that little country produces is far greater than that of 1,400 million Muslims, 1.4 billion Muslims. And that has given Israel phenomenal political power, military power, with which it has been able to subdue 500 million Arabs, or however many there are, and make them obey what Israel wants to do in the Middle East and to dispossess the Palestinians as it chooses to do. It comes from not the support of the United States, as many of us would like to believe. Many of us would like to believe that it's a grand conspiracy hatched between the United States and Israel, but well, look, conspiracies only work to an extent. If one looks at it in purely material terms, Saudi Arabia has received far more military hardware from the United States than Israel has, and yet the ability to innovate, even the ability to use that, depends essentially upon the training of the mind and the ability to deal with these products of modernity. Now, it's not just science, it's not just society that modernity provides, but it is also the institutions of modernity that are so very important. Institutions that provide justice, that provide governance, that provide even policing and opportunities for employment. These are all things that modernity can provide. And therefore now, I think to proceed, I need a more precise definition of modernity so that we can judge where Muslims in the world today stand, where lie the shortcomings, and therefore be able to see what needs to be done in order to move forward. So I would divide modernity into its three dimensions. So this is a disaggregation that could be done in other ways perhaps, but it is the way that I will choose to do it, and we can discuss if this is appropriate or not. The first dimension is epistemological. The way in which knowledge is acquired and what constitutes true knowledge. Modernity, as we generally accept it to be, is something that emerged in Europe around 400 years ago. And the epistemology of knowledge is that which is identified with thinkers such as Newton and Leibniz and Galileo and Bacon and others. At first, it sort of hurts to say that modernity is to be identified with what happened during the scientific revolution, during the industrial revolution of 4 centuries ago. It hurts me too. But on reflection, it's just accidental that it happened there and not elsewhere, because this is something that is universal. How else can one understand nature? After all, if I throw something, if I release something, it'll fall to the ground because of something called gravity. And gravity is the same in Europe as it is here in Singapore or anywhere else in the world. The atom, its structure, that it has a nucleus and electrons and all that, is the same everywhere in the universe. And now we have very good evidence of that. And so the ways in which these objects of nature are to be comprehended has to be universal either. They cannot depend upon the observer's ideology. They cannot depend upon whether that observer belongs to this religion or that religion or was born in this national state or that national state, cannot depend upon his race, cannot depend upon sex, gender, whatever. There is a universality. That universality is something that science absolutely insists upon, and it insists on testability, on verification. So that which is not testable and not verifiable, well, we don't say it doesn't exist. For example, I could give you there's an interpretation of quantum mechanics which says that every time you make a measurement, a new parallel universe is created. But I don't know how to test for it. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not there, who knows? But the consequences have to be testable. And so, if there is a theory of physics, that theory has to be able to explain observations as a minimum, but then it has to be able to predict. And in the power of prediction lies our certitude that we actually understand something. That's the natural world. And that's why I chose to become a physicist. But in the social sciences, in what concerns us humans, it can't be that simple. There are multiple reasons for that. We don't even know if determinism holds in the same way for us as very complicated aggregates of atoms as compared to, something simple like the stuff that I study, which is elementary particles and nuclei and so forth. But even more complicated than that is we don't know how we interact with that and how much true randomness occurs for whatever reason that there exists. This doesn't mean that the social sciences cannot be understood using science, but it does mean that perforce the power of prediction will not be there, and the ability to understand in detail will never be there. However, in broad terms, one can still use that approach of wanting empirical evidence, of looking for reasons, and for making broad statements which can help you understand history, the past, and perhaps guide your way into the future. So my contention is that although it is the same way of thinking, yet the nature of the two systems, that of inanimate objects and that of complex sentient beings, the the power of science is going to be much greater in the first as compared to the second. So now let me come to the present state of sciences in Islam. There was a time, and that time was from the 9th through the 13th centuries, when the only peoples on earth who carried the flame of learning, of the sciences, were Muslims. And we need to briefly go into that. There is, after all, a lot to be said about that, and condensing 4 centuries into 4 minutes is all that I'll be able to do. There was, as you know, there was no science at the time of the Holy Prophet, and none for another 150 years after that. But this was the time of the expansion of Islam, and so by the time it had reached as far as Damascus, as far as Baghdad, there was an encounter with the treasures of Greek civilization. In fact, some of what the Greeks had known were already there even before the expansion took place, but the encounter with Greek civilization took place with the Muslims getting to see a lot of the old books, manuscripts, and wondering what all this was about. And so the very first thing that had to be done was to translate them. There was curiosity. That's the main thing. There was curiosity. They wanted to know what's in those books. The first translators weren't Muslims. They were Nestorians, Christians, Jews. But gradually, it became Muslim translators, and these translations had a major impact upon the way that Muslims started to think about things. And this is the beginning of the rationalists in Islam, the Mu'tazila, who understood their faith as being built not just on faith alone, but on reason as well. So they became the rationalists of Islam. And if you look at the major scientific works of Muslims during that period, it was basically when the caliphs would invite various peoples from around the region, and some came as far as from Scotland. And Professor Abdus Salam speaks about Michael the Scot in his Nobel Prize award-winning ceremony. These different peoples came, and in the courts of the liberal caliphs, like Harun al-Rashid and so many Abdul Rahman, and they would be surrounded by curious people. There'd be Jews, Christians, Muslims, Nestorians, whatever. They'd be all working together. And in this spirit of liberalism, science prospered in Islam. And it did so for a very long time, 4 centuries, which means that there was support from within the society, or at least from within the upper levels of society. Society as a whole was never involved in this. And in fact, you could argue that the scientific revolution in Europe also did not involve vast numbers of people. It always involved the elites. But there was enough strength in those elites, enough curiosity that they still wanted to know. And that's what gave us people like Omar Khayyam, people like Ibn al-Haytham, who discovered the laws of optics long before Francis Bacon started to investigate them. And then why did it go away? That's a long, sad story. It comes about with the increasing conservatism, and people say that it is Imam al-Ghazali who, through his negation of cause and effect, essentially destroyed science in Islam. And of course, he wrote this very influential book called Tahaft al-Falasifa, that is, rejection of the philosophers. And 50, 60 years later, Ibn Rushd, Averroes as he is called, wrote Tahaft al-Falasifa, rejection of the philosophers. And it's a very interesting rejection because Ghazali said that whatever happens in this world is not because of your doing something, it's because of divine intervention. And so Ibn Rushd, Averroes says that he takes out particular paragraphs from Imam al-Ghazali's book, where Ghazali says that if you eat bread, don't think that it is the bread that gives you satiation. It's actually angels sent by God that give you the feeling of satiation. If you apply a match to a piece of cotton, don't think that it is you who has burned that cotton. It is actually the angels sent by God who have burnt that cotton, and so forth. By the way, taking a cue from Imam al-Ghazali, during the period of intense Islamization in Pakistan in the 1980s, and this is actually when I wrote the book that Professor Yaqub just mentioned, it was recommended by the conservative think tanks of that time that science should be taught in a very particular way. So, for example, you must not say that hydrogen and oxygen brought together will form water. No, that's not the Islamic way to teach chemistry. Instead, what you must say is that if hydrogen and oxygen are brought together, then by the will of Allah, they turn into water. I guess that's how alcohol is also made. But it was a denial of causation. And so, you see, by the way, this is also what happens when you say, inshallah. When you say that, should I say, inshallah, that this bottle will drop to the floor? Or should I not? Because if Allah is actually the cause of everything, then it is Allah who is forcing this bottle of water down, or through his angels or whatever. The point is that you cannot do science if you interject inshallah. It's very, very important. What you can, as a Muslim, believe is that the laws of physics were made by Allah, and it is those laws which then cause gravity to pull things down, or electromagnetic forces to join up an electron with a proton to give you a hydrogen atom, or hydrogen and oxygen to make water, etc., etc. It's through laws already made by God that the universe works. Science can accept that. It doesn't have a difficulty in that. But it cannot accept divine intervention at every stage. And so that was the insistence that basically killed science in Islam. So that's the epistemological part of it. There's the political system of Islam. Backtrack. The political system of Muslims. That I turn to next. And of course, that political system was not very different from that of political systems everywhere. In China, in Europe, wherever. Basically, in old times, so before 1648 in particular, the Treaty of Westphalia, there was no concept of nation states. There was no concept of democracy within a state. There were rulers and they were ruled, and sometimes those rulers were good and sometimes they were not. There were three big Muslim empires, the gunpowder empires. They were the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, more or less contemporaneous with each other. And they worked well for 300 to 400 years each. They also disappeared at the same time, and more or less for the same reason. It was European colonialism which finally dealt them a death blow. Were those good times? Yeah, in a sense. They resulted in magnificent architecture. They resulted in governance over wide swaths of territory. They were impressive in terms of creating a higher degree of civilization, but they weren't perfect. They required despotism. They required the use of force. They did not require consent of the ruled. And so democracy is a higher stage of governance, of political organization, where people are actually allowed to participate. And this, although it is not universal, today we can say that yes, the world, as far as governance and politics goes, is much, much superior than what it was 1,000 years ago. Now, the evolution within Muslims has been limited. If you look at the countries of the world today, there are 47 Muslim majority countries, and yeah, there's sort of democracy here and sort of democracy there. We look up to Malaysia with great respect because it is one of the most peaceful places among Muslim countries today. We see that Morocco is fairly good. There are other countries that are quite a ways away from democracy and from people's participation. Much of the Middle East is that way. What has been the impediment here? It has been the thinking among Muslims that Islam calls for a political system, and this is what has given rise to various movements today that demand the Khilafat, the Caliphate, restoration of the Caliphate, or a Caliphate under which Muslims should live. It has given rise to the demand for an Islamic state in many countries of the world, including my own, including Afghanistan, including Iraq, including Iran. So many countries in the region have peoples who think that there is such a thing as an Islamic state, whereas I would contend it simply does not exist in Islam. I am not an Islamic scholar. I stand to be corrected, but within the Quran, there is no mention of anything that even resembles a state. In fact, that word does not exist in Arabic. We use something called riyasat for state in Urdu, but riyasat comes from Farsi. It doesn't come from Arabic. I don't know, is anyone familiar enough with Arabic to know what is presently used for the state? I looked up the Google translation from Arabic to English, from English to Arabic. And if you put in state over there, you get something. But that word doesn't exist in the Quran. It doesn't exist in the Hadith also. In fact, Prophet Muhammad did not specify what the organization of Muslims would be upon his death, or who would head the Ummah. Yes, there is such a thing as the Ummah. But who was it to be? Was it to be Abu Bakr? Or was it to be Ali? We know that the answer was not given. In fact, he did not even say what qualities to look for in his successor. He never talked about his successor. And so the concept of an Islamic state is a void one. Certainly, Muslims must look after their interests as best as they can, but it is not the answer of what to do with it. Whether there is to be a Sharia state or not, as is being sought in so many countries of the world today by Muslim populations, that answer you will not find either in the Quran or Hadith. So can Islam be made compatible with political modernity? My contention is yes. Yes, you can do it by simply doing what is sensible. With democracy, yeah, I guess you can find it in some ways, ijma, consensus. You can use ijtihad. You will not find the exact way of how to organize a democratic state. You will not find the formula for making a Singapore. But if you're sensible, you can find something that will sort of resemble it and be satisfied with that, because Islam is not about how to organize every little bit of your day-to-day things here on earth. It's about what to do over there. And finally, so I've identified epistemology, I've identified political culture. Now let me talk a little bit about, thanks. Let me talk about culture. Now, culture means a whole lot of things. It means beliefs, it means social mores, it means the role of sexuality, it means a lot of other general assumptions like that. And all of these things have changed with time. Have they not? Do we accept slavery anymore? No. Sure, it was acceptable in that day and age, but no longer. Photography didn't exist then, but making pictures, drawing human faces was gunah kabira. It was the great sin, which is why one doesn't have depiction of the human faces in Islamic culture. You see patterns, you see intricate drawings, you see beautiful calligraphy, but you don't see human faces. Well, things have changed. And rather recently, in fact, because just 40 years ago, the ulama in my country, Pakistan, would say it is haram to take a photograph. It is haram to watch television. In fact, the 2005 earthquake that I took my students to, 90,000 people got killed in that. Half the peoples over there had been convinced by the mullahs that it was watching television that had brought about the earthquake. And so I actually witnessed a television smashing ceremony. They were throwing television sets out of the third floor of a building, and because the television and depiction of the human face was what was bringing this catastrophe. But now, show me someone who doesn't watch television, including all the ulama, and now you can watch them with their mobile phones taking selfies of themselves. I say, my God, how did that happen? So, culture changes. And it's a very good thing that culture changes. I don't know how they justify it. Take, now this is more contentious, banking. So, sood, interest, banking interest, riba, is haram. And if you read Maulana Maududi, who is the ideologue of the Jamaat-e-Islami in Pakistan and whose influence spreads far and wide, he says, banking interest is more haram than zina, illegal sexual intercourse. And so, in the Muslim world, banking did not exist for a very long time. But today you have banks all over the Muslim world. And sometimes they call themselves Islamic banking, but they give you interest at exactly the same rate as the other banks do. Now there are things that are called Islamic credit cards, Sharia-compliant credit cards. My God, what is that? It's a cover-up. You have weather forecasting now. The meteorology department was attacked, physically attacked in Pakistan because of a belief that you cannot predict the weather because only Allah knows whether it's going to rain or not, which is why He has Salat-e-Istasqa in the Quran, so that if it doesn't rain, then you go out and rain and it will rain after that. And now here you are trying to predict. Shame on you. So the meteorology department had to be closed down for a long time, but now there are weather forecasts on television, which you're not supposed to watch anyway, but it's all there. And now nobody cares about that. So my point is that culture changes. Now everything has happened. All these changes that have brought Muslims into modernity have happened. And more and more and more will happen as time goes on. But what's the difference? Other peoples got into this quicker. And so they were able to take advantage of this faster. And so it's not that Muslims have gone backwards. They have progressed. It's just that they haven't progressed at the rate that others have. We're not going backwards. We are moving, but we're not moving fast enough. So if we try and anticipate what things will be like 50 years later, and maybe that's too much, maybe 30 years later, and say, yeah, look, right now we're putting unnecessary impediments. Let's speed up. Let's get to where the others are. And then I think there will be massive change. Change is happening in the Muslim world. Maybe not for the right reason, though. Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're moving. They're moving very, very fast. But it is not because the people wanted those changes. It's because the rulers wanted those changes. And those rulers, so it's very idiosyncratic, I would say. A ruler thinks that the way to move ahead is by letting women drive. Fine, that's a damn good thing in my opinion. But it wasn't by popular consensus, it was forced through. And then, as you know, there are many changes that have taken place in the Middle East and so forth. So I'll just end over here because I hope there'll be a lot because I hope I've provoked at least some of you and you will be wanting to ask questions. But I'll end by saying that what we need is to anticipate the future. Muslims are going to be around. The earth is going to be around in spite of climate change. And so let's anticipate how things are going to be, how values will be forced to change. They have changed, and they will change. And let's move with the times. That's when we hope to see a world that is better for Muslims and for everyone. The more we realize that we are all the same peoples everywhere, and that we accidentally happen to be born into this religious community or that religious community, this national state or that national state, if we realize the irrelevance of that, then it'll be a much, much happier world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hubai. We would now like to commence the question and answer session. But before that, let me introduce Professor Yaacob Ibrahim, which I didn't get to earlier. Sorry,
okay,
Prof.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Right.
Let me just do it. It's in my script. So, Professor Yaacob Ibrahim is currently a professor of engineering at SIT. Prior to this, Prof. Yaacob was a member of parliament in the Singapore Parliament and was also the minister in charge of Muslim affairs. So now he is busy in the public policy space and the Muslim community in various ways, and this is one of them. We also have Dr. Noor Sharil, a senior fellow of the ISIS Yusof Isha Institute. He will help us to manage the questions online. Thank you, Dr. Sharil. Now we would like to commence the Q&A session. So we will take questions from the floor and also online on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Better late than never, I suppose. Thank you, Prof. Hubai. It was, I thought, a very good lecture, spanning a very long time period, basically. There's a lot to digest. Perhaps I will ask were any immediate burning question from the audience, because as the chair, I do have the privilege of asking the first question. But I'll give to my good friend, Alumni. Go ahead, please. You have a question. Is there a mic? Yeah. Can someone pass the mic, Radin? Yeah. Yeah, the mic is coming.
Thank you, Dr. Pervez. Your example of the anesthesia, I think goes to show that embracing science and technology is less of a challenge for the Muslim world today. Even in backward countries, I mean, you go to Yemen or Afghanistan, the accessibility to internet is there. So I think embracing science and technology is a challenge, but not a great challenge to me. And also, reforming or changing fatwas about bank interest or about television and so on, I think more difficult, but I think it's something which is not as great a challenge as embracing the modernity worldview. You mentioned Abdul Salam many times, and I was in Pakistan about 5 years ago, and I read a report in the newspaper that there was an attempt to remove his name, from the faculty, I think, name of faculty or department, because he's a Qadiani. Because he's a Qadiani. Not clear?
Bring the mic lower.
Oh, lower like this. Oh, sorry. Because he's a Qadiani. And in 1974, he departed from Pakistan because Parliament passed a law, to declare Qadianis as non-Muslims. So one example of a modernity worldview is polarity and the embrace of polarity in our lives, in society, And this is a more difficult challenge to overcome because it needs a kind of reform in Islamic thinking. You've done wonderful work, Dr. Pervez, brilliant work, in the real science and technology. But I think the real challenge is really in the worldview. How do you view the modern world? Because modernity comes with it many concepts, many ideas, which govern our lives today. Secularism. Muslims say, this is coming from the West, And they introduce secularism because they want to destroy the Muslims and Islam. How about equal citizenship? I was told, that in Pakistan, I have the ambassador on my right here. Please pardon me. during partition, Christians were about 10% of the population. But when I was in Pakistan, I asked, they say it's about less than 1%. Minorities are living, you know? So they have not reconciled living in a modern world by embracing the whole idea of equal political rights, equal citizenship, right? And even, of course, I'm glad that you mentioned Islamic State, because it's never, the concept never exists in the Quran and the Hadith, you know? So my question to you is basically, I think the problem today is not having, you know, brilliant people, scientists like nuclear physicists like you to bring the Islamic world, you know, to a path of science, technology, you know, nuclear technology or physics or science or biology or humans. I mean, but it's really getting our theologians, our jurisprudence, you know, our Islamic philosophers, you know, to reform, to relook, reform, and renew. And I think that's what we need for Islamic world. The whole idea of a global, you know, reform in Islamic thinking at the most basic and most fundamental level, and to see how, you know, Muslims can reconcile Islam and the products of modernity that we're talking about today. Thank you.
I absolutely, is this working? Yeah. Okay. I completely agree with you. Modernity is not surrounding yourself with gadgetry. You can do that endlessly, but it doesn't make the mind modern. The modern mind is one that appreciates diversity, not just tolerates it, but appreciates diversity. So different kinds of people can live and be your neighbors, and you will like them equally. You might feel a little bit of affinity for your own kind, but your kind now is broad. It's spread over many different categories. And yes, you are absolutely right that Abdus Salam, who is an Ahmadi, received abominable treatment at the hands of the Pakistani state and the Pakistani people. I hold the people just as responsible as the state in this regard, because one sees the social prejudice against them. It is heartrending. It's like what you see with the Baha'is in Iran. It's like what you see with Shias in Afghanistan, who now with the takeover of the Taliban are trying to just squeeze themselves into some corner of Afghanistan. Wherever a society is undeveloped, it will not accept secularism, it will not accept others as their equals. And so yes, thank you for insisting on this point. But before I leave this point, it also has to be, modernity has to be about gender equality as well. The kind of protests that we are seeing in Iran today, where this young woman, just 22 years old, was beaten to death by the police for throwing off her hijab, or burning it, I don't know which. After which, something like 30 people today have been killed. And this is proof that peoples of the Muslim world want freedom. They want azadi. They want to be like other peoples in the world.
Thank you very much. Perhaps in the interest of time, let me just take a few questions together before I turn to the online space. Are there any other persons with any burning questions? Okay, there's one there, 2, and 3. Okay, we start with the gentleman at the back. Oh. Can you introduce yourself, please, for the purpose of our transcription?
Hello, Dr. Hood. I'm Asif Ali from Pakistan. I'm a research fellow in NTU in applied physics. My question is, you just mentioned the gender equality, and we talk about the modernity includes that calls for the gender equality. But what about for example, there is this example which is mentioned in Quran, what about the inheritance? We talk about like there's a 1/3 to the woman and 2/3 to the men of the house would be inherited to their children. So my question is, things that are not mentioned in Quran or things that are not mentioned in Hadith are easily acceptable, are changeable, but things that are mentioned in Quran and things that are mentioned in Hadith, what are your views on that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The second.
That's a.
Can we take 3 questions together?
I'll forget.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
and this is,
But I'm here to remind you.
this is so important a question. I absolutely must respond. Well, look, I'm not a Muslim scholar, but Muslim scholars have taken a very reasoned position on this. And they say you have to look at the reasons behind a particular revelation. It's called Asbab-e-Nuzul in Urdu. And Dr. Fazlur Rahman, who was at Chicago, would insist upon we understand at what time, in what context a particular verse was revealed. Now, slavery is not forbidden in the Quran, but we forbid it. And so this goes against the Quran. However, we're willing to do that, aren't we? We're not willing to have slaves anymore. And so we should be willing to give equal inheritances to girls, to women. And there's so many other examples also. There's also another tack that has been taken, which is that you look at the meaning of the Arabic words that were used in that time. Look at the context. And this was the Mu'tazila way of looking at disputes, as well as that of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. And so there are ways around this. You don't have to come up in direct confrontation, but you can't accept inequality either.
Thank you. There was a hand at the back. Yes. Sharil, how are we doing? No questions here. Okay. Can you make your questions short so we have more people who are able to ask questions?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Hafiz. Thank you for your presentation, Doctor. I have a question, slightly philosophical. It's with regards to naturalism. In science, we have seen in history that most of the scientists actually had a religious outlook as well. People like Newton, Bale, and then, but somehow it has changed in the last century, where science has been seen to be related to sensationism, whereby you get the data from experience based on your sensory perception, sensationism. And there's also a flavor of atheism, which most scientists are. They don't believe in God. And thirdly, there is the flavor of materialism, where the world basically is all matter. Okay, so that is the temper of the scientific enterprise. This in general. So, in your estimation, can there be an inclusion of the supernatural or of God in the scientific endeavor? Or do you think that is totally being precluded in science? Hence, naturalism can only be from an atheistic, materialistic, and sensationist perspective. Thank you.
A quick response. There is only one universe, only one type of atom, only one type of matter, I should say. We humans share the same DNA with only minor fluctuations. And so therefore, there cannot be a different epistemology of the world, a different epistemology period, actually, given our similarities. And so we have to arrive at the same science. So science cannot be influenced by the religious beliefs or ethnic background or whatever of anyone. Now, scientists can be spiritual, and if they choose to, they can believe, they can have certain metaphysical beliefs. You can believe in one God, or as Hindus do, in multiple gods. You can believe in heaven or hell, or you can believe in multiple rebirths. Those matters are irrelevant to science. You can be spiritual, you can be metaphysical, but in the last analysis, it's what you prove through experiment and observation that makes your science worthy or unworthy?
Okay, Mariam? Yeah, the lady here, the lady here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kupa. Thank you very much, Dr. Yaacob, for giving me this opportunity. I'm Mariam Aljanet. I'm an adjunct faculty here at the psychology department. And I think you've given a really insightful unpacking for me about... Okay, sorry. Is this better? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'll make it short. My question relates to what I see to be Muslims in modern societies in particular, gravitating towards perhaps looking for Islamic solutions because what they see or what they perceive as problems that arise from modernity. Allow me to give you an example that's close to my area, which is mental health. And sobering facts about Singapore, which is essentially a modern society, where mental health is of a prime concern. Our suicide rate is one of the highest in the world, 1 a day, higher if you could think about individuals from 10 to 19 years old at their prime. This is not new, right? So I think this is one example whereby perhaps have driven many Muslims in modern society to look for perhaps an Islamic version of things like Islamic psychology, for example. I'm not an expert in Islamic psychology. I'm a nascent reader at best. My own sense of looking at what's coming out from various places about Islamic psychology as a solution towards the problem of modernity, I can't help but feel that many of it is more an Islamization of knowledge. Fundamentally, it's still Western, if you like, with perhaps a little bit of whitewashing and quite shallow connection to Islamic ideas. What are your thoughts about this? Thank you.
If Islam gives you a sense of peace, what can be better? There are limits to what science can do for humans. It can create better material conditions. It can help you understand the world. It can take you to the very beginnings of the universe. But it cannot tell you why you and I exist. It cannot tell you what is right and what is wrong. And it does not necessarily give you the peace that you need mentally. If you can find peace doing yoga, or if you can find peace reading the Quran, or if you can find peace listening to surahs which are recited, it's perfectly fine with me. It's to be welcomed.
Before I turn on to the online space, let me use my privilege to ask Professor Holbrook one question. You ended the lecture by saying that the only way for us to move ahead is to move faster, as you argued that other societies have already transited and moved far ahead from Muslim communities. If I take it at face value, it's just meaning we just adopt more of what is going on in the scientific world, which some countries are doing in the Middle East, starting hospitals, getting experts from the West, and so on and so forth. I mean, it sounds a bit simple to me. Instead of perhaps what you need, indeed a revolution in terms of education, in terms of how the younger population is taught about how to understand science and their religious faith, basically. So I just want to understand that better, because if you talk about just moving faster, it seems very simple. And I think some countries in the Middle East seem to be doing that, because they think by just taking on what is in the West, they've already become modern. Your thoughts, please?
Oh, thank you for giving me this chance to explain myself. When I said move faster, I meant particularly in education, because it is education, and especially early education, where all the difference is made. So if you look at, for example, Pakistanis who go to Britain and you compare their achievement levels with Indians or even with Bangladeshis or with other ethnic groups over there, they're far behind, because They insist on educating their children in the same way that they are educated in Pakistan. What's the difference between the kind of education that you would get in a country like mine as compared to what you would get in Finland? I won't even dare to tell you what the difference is, but the whole thing is that kids outside, kids who are Chinese, who are Christian or have no religion, as in the Scandinavian countries mostly, they're taught to be curious. They're taught to want to know about the outside world. They're not told that all the answers lie in this book that has been revealed. So that makes all the difference. And so when you say we need to move ahead, I meant particularly in the field of education.
Thank you. Shari, question from the online? No? Is it on?
Technology has failed.
No.
Test. Can you hear me now?
Okay,
Okay,
great,
good.
yeah.
Thanks, Professor Hoodboy. You mentioned Ibn Rushdi in your speech, and now Ibn Rushdi has a question for you. This is Ibn Rushdi from Indonesia, and he has a question, a very simple one. What do you think, what is your perspective about this whole idea of Islamization of the sciences, which is, I suppose, is currently a very popular concept now, particularly in Southeast Asia? It's just a general question. What are your thoughts about this whole project? If I may add further, Professor, they've moved even further, integration of knowledge. I mean, can you just share your thoughts?
Oh, I thought I'd already answered it. There's only one science, and you're wasting your time if you're trying to Islamize science. It just cannot be done. You can talk about how science ought to be used. That's a different thing. But there's only one kind of electron and only one kind of proton. And so everything that we have around us is the play of electromagnetic forces, which just don't care who is viewing it, who is using it. So yes, if you're talking about whether we should be doing genetic engineering, that's a different question. That's an application of science.
Thank you. In fact, I remember interacting with the late Professor Hussein Alatas on this issue of Islamization of knowledge, and he asked a very simple question: how do you Islamize a shoe? And so you know that you can answer that question, basically. All right, can I have a next hand? Yes, sir, please. Can someone pass the mic to the gentleman here? And then after that, at the back, yes.
Thank you very much. Hello, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Hoodboy. My name is Imran, and I am a former alumni of former Christian College, Lahore. And I currently work for a technology research firm in Singapore. I have actually wanted to ask you, what kind of advice will you give to young Muslims today to embark on this journey and get a right balance between Islam and modernity? Thank you.
Well, the advice is that, first of all, you have to have the knowledge and the skills that make you desirable and employable in the modern world. But don't lose your bearings while trying to compete. Stay healthy mentally. Regard peoples around you as your equals. You're neither superior to them, nor are you inferior to them. Be confident. You are the product of accident. Let that always be very reassuring to you. You could have been born here, you could have been born there, you could have been born a Shia or a Sunni, or an Ahmadi or an Ismaili. So Muslim, yes, respect all Muslims. Don't say that one kind of Muslim is better than the other, and don't say that your kind of Muslim is better than Christians or Jews or whatever. So we live in a world which is increasingly cosmopolitan. Be a part of that.
Sorry, I again want to use my privilege. when you say we are here by accident, the other side will disagree. That your creation has already been planned. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's the old question of determinism. We will not be able to resolve that in the short time that we are here. But don't we see randomness all around us? Don't we see the impossibility of predicting whether a coin will land heads or tails? Don't we see the impossibility of DNA mutations, some of which survive and some don't? Don't we see that procreation is really all about DNA? So, look, here is something that one has to take a position on, whether there is a divine purpose in our being here, or are we the product, or is it all accidental? The ones who think that they have a mission in life, it can give you peace, but it can also make you very dangerous.
I suppose the second part depends on your orientation, basically, right? In terms of being dangerous, basically. All right, Farid, please, can you give the mic to Professor Farid? Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question, but just before that, I wanted to say on this issue of whether it's random or planned. Even if we believe there's a plan, we don't know that plan. So to us, it is as if it is random. And the danger is if we claim to know that the plan of God, and therefore try to intervene on God's behalf. That is the danger. But my question has to do with your comment about Israel and the Muslim world. You said there's more science being done in Israel of a population of 9 million in comparison to 1.4 billion Muslims. Could you say more about that? Are you speaking about the volume of research, the number of scientific papers, or scientific attitudes? What really do you feel are the differences between Israel and the Muslim world in terms of science?
First, let me say that it was such a pleasure to meet Professor Farid Alatas, and I'm here because of him. I received my letter of invitation from him. I can't let your first comment go unanswered. It may be that there's a plan for us to be here, and we don't know the plan, but are we to spend our time trying to guess the mind of God? Or are we here trying to understand the rules that already exist, decipher them, and then try to make sense of the world around as we see it? So it's a moot question in my mind whether there's a plan or not, because if we can't know the plan, then let's do what we can. And let's not think ourselves as being either superior or inferior to others who inhabit this planet. That was my. As far as Israel goes, in terms of publications, who cares about publications anyway these days? It's, these days a graduate student produces 30 research papers in my country and none of them mean anything. So you're not going to look at it from that point of view. It's in terms of the ideas that originate from within Israel, the kind of technology, and there's some pretty nasty technology that comes out of that, like this Pegasus software which can just wreck any encryption system. It's the kind of high tech which they are exporting and which you can go and see on the Mundi Index that exceeds the sum total of all that is exported by Muslim countries combined. That's a quantitative indicator. But in terms of, let's say, the field that I am familiar with, particle, cosmology, nuclear, in those fields, you see idea after idea coming out of the Weizmann Institute. You don't see anything from Muslim countries except in Turkey and in Iran. These are two countries. My observation is very limited. I don't know that anyone has done any real statistical evaluations, but I see these two countries, Turkey and Iran, as contributing significantly to the areas that I am familiar with. And of course, Israel is head and shoulders above both.
There was a gentleman at the back. Yes, please.
Good morning, Professor Dr. Perez. My name is Cheryl, and I am I'm a lot of things. I'm also a public intellectual and academic. So a quick question to you, to tie off of your commentary on epistemic production and the flip side of it, epistemicide. Because you mentioned that science, there's a post-positive sort of approach with reproducibility and all that, and then there are different paradigms. But my question actually goes towards what do you see are certain challenges for young academics, especially Islamic academics, with regard to producing knowledge, especially when in the field, and we know that there are different hierarchies in institutions and in places where we produce knowledge, where some knowledges is not as equally valued as others, not because of the lack of rigor or lack of methodology, but the fact that it's produced in certain spaces. So, have you seen such issues, and what do you think are the challenges that young Muslim scholars and academics face, and what are some of the advice that you can give with regard to addressing such challenges?
I need a bit of clarification. Do you mean knowledge production in the natural sciences, or in the social sciences, or in the fields of Islamic history, or things related to Islam? If you would be a little more specific, I could perhaps answer more effectively.
Well, okay, my own anecdotal understanding is cited towards social sciences, and the fact that there are hierarchies within institutions that some produce more knowledge than others. It's not that they produce more knowledge than others; they are more visible than others. And you mentioned that publishing is not exactly someone who is a little more privileged would say that publishing is not an issue, but for many of the junior scholars, publishing is either publish or perish sort of situation. So you see. There are papers with regard to decolonization, where African universities are actually publishing good quality research, but they're not usually highly cited or highly visible simply because they are African universities. So there's this issue there.
You're asking me a very difficult question. I can say that the number of papers you publish is an indicator if you are in an environment where academic honesty is generally holds true. And there is, in most academic fields, a rigorous peer review system in place, which makes publication of research papers meaningful, and that's how it is going to be for a very long time, maybe forever. On the other hand, in many parts of the world, including the part that I come from, there is a huge amount of academic corruption. And people invent their own journals, publish in them, and then those journals fold up. Or there are cartels by which they are what are called citation cartels. There are all kinds of hanky-pankies that are going on. And so it's too broad a question for me to answer. Even in the natural sciences, you have trivia being published, and it's done by groups that are conniving with each other, individuals that are conniving with each other. So it's complicated. There are still journals in the world, in the natural sciences and in the social sciences, which hold quality and which check and which check not just for plagiarism, but for also the quality of the ideas and the quality of the results obtained.
We are going to end up soon. I just want to see a show of hands as one. Anybody else? 2, 3. Okay. We'll start with the gentleman here first. Can someone pass the mic? Oh, sorry, there's a 4. I didn't see it. Yeah. This gentleman. So just make your question short, please, so we can have more time. Please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Alf, and I'm one of those Scandinavian guys you talked about before, even though I've come a long way now and actually embraced Islam, so religiously different. Anyway, it reminded me of a professor I had in political science who said there was this guy who was convicted of theft. In his defense, he said, well, it's not my fault. I didn't have the opportunities provided to me by society. So the question I was, well, should society then maybe go to jail instead? By linking back to what you said about nurturing curiosity, right? So this sort of dynamism between your independent individual responsibility to drive and be curious versus being given opportunities by the institution, by the government. What are your thoughts around that? Personal versus institutional responsibility to change and be modern.
Well, if one is not curious about the world, then one does not learn about it. And this is how societies which are religious and authoritarian want their citizens to be. They want their citizens to simply obey, not ask. So this, unfortunately, is the state in my country. It's the state in many Muslim countries of the world. And I think that we would be better off if we encourage our students, our children, to ask questions. We need to break the authoritarianism that is present in the society and within the family as well. The father is a tyrant. He is not your friend. He is somebody who you cannot question in a traditional Muslim society. That is now changing. It's a very welcome change. Well, maybe you can go overboard on this. Maybe you can have a society where no respect is paid to parents and no sense of obligation happens over there, and then the family then does not emerge as a strong social unit. I believe there are advantages, strong advantages to having the family as a social unit. And so it's always a very delicate question, how much freedom to give to your kids and how much to tell them what is right.
There was a question here. Yeah. Second. After that, Munir. Sorry, Munir first. I saw his hand first, sorry. Not because he's my friend, but you know.
Thank you very much, Munir Shah. I had a discussion some 2 decades ago, and the KPIs may have changed today, that the GDP for Spain was about the same as all the countries in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC. And I was really taken aback, that all these countries, and Spain is not even a heavyweight in Europe. The question we asked then, and I would like you to give your comments, is it because of the religion that we profess that inhibits the fact that we have not been dominant in the field of not just modernity, but also in terms of progress and in terms of the wealth?
I think somebody did a calculation of how many books were published in Spain and how many books were translated in Spain, and that number came out to be twice that of all the books published and translated in the Muslim world. So that is certainly one indicator. I'm not aware of the GNP figures, but I would be surprised given that there are oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia, and UAE and Iran to an extent as well. So would that include the oil wealth? That would be very unusual, suspicious though.
Yep, young man, then the young man at the back, and finally the young man in front.
Thank you, Dr. Pervez Hudbai, for the talk. I think it was very interesting. So I just had a quick question. As a Pakistani, right, do you see Pakistan bettering its scientific temperament in the foreseeable future? Thank you.
I am certainly hoping that it will. We're in a bad position right now. I'll tell you that. But there's always hope. Look, I can't foresee what it'll be like 20 years from now, at which point I'll be no longer around. But look, the hope lies in basically the internet, people being able to learn on their own. I don't have hope for the universities as they currently exist, because their gatekeepers are determined to shut out all talent, all genuine academics. Apart from 3 or 4 of them, 3 or 4 out of 250, that's the way it is. However, the amount of human potential that there is over there in Pakistan and elsewhere is enormous. And the fact that today you can take distance learning courses from anywhere in the world makes a huge difference, and I am seeing it make a difference.
Yes, Faris, there was a hand at the back there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Hoodboy. I'm very impressed by your lecture, and I've been following your works for quite some time. My name is Faris Rizwan, and I'm
impressed.
Yeah. I was very
impressed, not
impressed. No, not impressed. Impressed. Yeah.
The science wasn't working so well just now. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a Malay Studies graduate student from the National University of Singapore. So my question is really dealing with the presence or lack of the modern mind, even among Muslim scientists. So, I mean, ever since I was a physics student in junior college, I was very interested in comparing the developments in quantum physics, which is more probabilistic, as compared to Newtonian physics, which is more mechanical and deterministic. And I was very excited about the Higgs boson and all that, right? How learning how every particle is a wave in a field, and how the Higgs boson field came first before the particle, and how when elementary particles interact with the Higgs field, and then they gain mass and all that. So I was very interested in what Muslim scholars had to say, Muslim scientists had to say, right? So I attended a talk by a Muslim physics scientist, a graduate. No, he's not a graduate student, he's a professor actually. I won't mention who, in NUS, in the National University of Singapore. And actually, I was quite excited to learn about his contributions to the development of quantum physics and Higgs boson. But actually, what he was actually lecturing about was how quantum physics actually justified the truth of the Quran. He was actually trying to say that quantum physics actually was predicted by the Quran, and it was actually how he uses quantum physics as a way to justify that the Quran is indeed true, or Islam is indeed true. And I came across some journal articles as well by Muslim scientists who publish in international journals. For instance, I think one journal article in the Journal of Physics conference series, it was in an international conference, that was talking about how the God particle was predicted by Al-Quran Surah Yunus. So he's a Muslim physicist. So I'm wondering whether you have observed these kind of trends amongst Muslim scientists, and whether you have any comments on these ideas, because I think it's quite consequential on our society if they have these kind of ideas, and also the concern about Islamization of knowledge. Yeah.
No, what he's essentially saying is that there are some Muslim scientists who claim that all the modern physics theory can be found in the Quran, has been predicted. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after the fact, much can be said. But what we would really prefer is to have a prediction and have that followed by an observation. That's the way that science works. Now, countless examples from countless religions. So, for example, the Big Bang Theory was held to be against Hinduism. Instead, it was said to be steady-state creationism, steady-state creation, which was consistent with the Vedas. But then when the proof started coming in, those very people who were Hindus started saying exactly the opposite. So it doesn't make a difference to science either way. And the same can be said about Islam. What I want from anyone is to give me an example, just one example of an experiment that owes to something within some holy book, some new testable theory, some machine that has been made using a principle enunciated in this or that holy book. The point is that holy books are not here for that purpose. Holy books are there to tell you how to live your life, how to relate with those around you, and how to prepare for life after death. It's not to tell you about which particles exist, whether there's the Higgs, which by the way is called the God particle for ungodly reasons. It's not here to tell you about anything about chemistry or physics. These books are there for a very different purpose. So I hope I've answered your question on this. Was that your question?
Yeah, I understand that, but it's just that I was just wondering whether you observed like that kind of trend, because I know it's problematic, but like, I see it even in the National University of Singapore when we invite like Muslim physicists and all that. They talk about the same thing, and then they go to mosques and they talk about the same thing. They're not actually. It's like science in reverse, right? Like they're not even doing science, like what you said. So I'm wondering about the consequences it has if our own Muslim scientists are having that kind of unscientific.
Simply ask them for a single example.
Okay, I'm going to allow the gentleman there. He's raised his hand. Can someone pass the mic? Then Sharil after this, huh? Sharil. Come on, guys. We are going to wrap up soon. Okay, come.
Hi, good afternoon, Professor.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Go ahead, please. Yes.
I'm an undergraduate student in biology. Thank you for your speech. My question is epistemological. So you spoke that science and social science are very different in nature, and that human societies cannot be studied the same way you study particles and quarks and so on, or behave in a very different way. But at the same time, you speak of an idea of progress, which I think you associate with a liberal sort of idea, equality, freedom, and so on. And clearly the idea of progress exists in science, that you can build on the knowledge of someone else, and that objective knowledge to be found. But can human societies evolve in the same linear, progressive way? Can we apply the idea of progress to society, is my question. And what do you mean by that? Thank you.
Certainly don't evolve in a linear way. There are all kinds of unforeseen things. There are wars and plagues. Who could have foreseen what COVID would bring? So the answer is that no, it's not linear progress. But if you see how what's been happening on Earth over the last 400 years, there is a far greater understanding of nature, a far greater use of natural principles, physical principles to alter our lives in the way that we want to. There's also been far more destructive weapons that have been produced. So in that sense, yes, there's linearity in some directions, but in terms of being able to say where we will be 10 years from now, I don't think there's any progress in that. Linear means it's a straight line and you can put dots wherever you want.
Prof. Mazna, can someone pass the mic to Prof. Mazna, please?
Thank you, Professor Hoodboy, for that great lecture. I have a very short comment and question. It could be both. I think you didn't quite talk about the elephant in the room. You spoke about Muslim society, Muslim communities, but you didn't talk about the Muslim leadership. I think, you see, that could also explain a lot of the problems.
Yeah, the Muslim leadership. So 47 countries. I don't even know the names of all the leaders of the 47 countries. But yes, in some countries certainly have done better than others. We see, for example, that Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan, started doing a lot better once it was released from the hold of West Pakistan. And that was because its leadership said that we don't have to believe that our nation has been created for Muslims only. Yes, the majority will be Muslims, but this will have a secular constitution. And so, yes, leaders, well, the founder of Bangladesh was murdered, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, just a couple of years into its independence. But by and large, it has been the direction which has been important over there. It's which Muslim country do you want to look at? The leaders, of course, change with time to time. But by and large, when you have a government and a leader at the top of that government with a view that is expansive, that is accommodative, then that country does well. Turkey was doing very well. Let's hope that it continues to do well, but there are very troubling signs over there. So, yeah, but it's too broad a question for me to answer in this short time.
Okay, I'll allow the gentleman, the lady, then Shariel. Shariel, you keep going back. Come, you raised your hand just now, yes. Yeah, here. Make it short and quick. Huh?
Hi, thank you for that. So my name is Ali Qasem, I'm a faculty member here. And my question is really, so you said you were going to define modernity, and I'm not sure that happened, and I would love to hear a bit more about, what is the modernity you're inviting us into? Because I think a lot of the promises of modernity, a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, democracy, liberties, respect for others, and so on, have gone unachieved. And they've, as a sociologist, I would say they were myth. If we look at the most modern places in the world today, they're some of the most unequal places in the world. Racism, poverty, inequalities, so on. Questions of mental health. And I would say the elephant in the room is the climate catastrophe, which very much comes out of modernity. And that's why, in the UK, where I studied and lived for quite some time, I think it would be quite impossible to find a social scientist or anyone who studies societies who would say, let's be modern. It's all about how can we get out of modernity? How can we find alternatives to modernity? How can we move beyond modernity? Because it's pretty much destroyed the planet, and it's pretty much destroyed, communities, you mentioned families, and so on. So my question is, what is the modernity that we're being invited into? And what does that say if we look at the modern world? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Modernity could mean so many negatives. It could mean the excessive consumption, that which is destroying our planet. It could mean alienation. Which means that you have suicides, lots of them, young people who find no purpose in life, who find competitions so very painful, loss of purpose. So I understand where you're coming from, but I'm trying to look at it in a more macro way. Modernity implies a system of justice, which even if not perfect in its application, yet says that there's no king over there. Everybody who is a citizen of a state is to be subject to the same laws and to be punished in the same way. We know it doesn't happen, but at least there's a principle over there, and that is quintessentially modern. 20 different things that modernity can stand for, but look at the world today and compare it with in pre-modern times. Nobody wants to go back to pre-modern times, even though you can paint wonderful pictures of it, but you'd rather be here.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah. Dr. Hudboy, Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, thank you for your talk. I'm actually wanting to answer your question, the one you raised in your talk. You asked if there's an Arabic word for the word state. In fact, there is. It is dawla, dal, waw, lam, and ta marbuta, and it means state. And even though the Quran doesn't explicitly use the word dawla, it employs it once within the book, within the text of the book, and it doesn't explicitly use it to mean state. However, I just want to put a little thought out there to say that the Prophet himself, peace and blessings be upon him, established, in fact, a very successful Islamic state in the city of Medina, making him a very successful first statesman of a Muslim state, essentially. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
2 points on that. Dawla means commonwealth. It means it does not mean a state in the sense that we understand it today. It does not imply geographical boundaries, most importantly. Islam did not have geographical boundaries at that point, and so the meaning is completely different from what it was, what it became in 1948. I don't know if dawla is used in the Quran or not. You say it is not. Well, that's further proof. Yeah. Then as far as the state of Medina goes, the Misaq-e Medina, I've actually looked at a PhD thesis which was precisely on that. And as you know, the documentation has not survived from that time. But this person who wrote the PhD thesis identified the 61 shiqe, what does shiq mean? The points, 61 points, which were part of this misaq, of this understanding. And it wasn't a constitution by any means. It was how to deal with issues of war, of mali ghanimat, the war booty, what to do with women who had been captured, what to do with issues of governance as they existed at that time. So the Holy Prophet was a genius, a political genius as well in getting all these tribes together, making them sign on to this understanding. But by no means was that a constitution as is alleged by so many people around the world these days. There was no concept, first of all, of boundaries. There was no concept of a police. There was no concept of taxation. There was no concept of ministries. No concept of division of labor. So how could it be a constitution? In what way was that a state of Medina?
Cheryl, now you have your turn. You're going to ask this question.
Yes, this is basically an online question from Hazira Muhammad. And I think this is a sociological question. I think the reference is to what you said about the TV burning incident after the earthquake. In your opinion, why is irrationality so easily embraced by a particular community as compared to the scientific and rational explanations? And why do you think irrationality remains appealing to some segments in society?
Irrationality. Yeah. Appealing to some
Why
people.
is irrationality so pervasive? Well, it all goes back to early childhood education. If you're taught that it is jinns and devils and angels who run the world, then it seems so natural. Now, I can tell you that within the physics department, the majority of teachers and students would actually believe that the moon was split in two by the Holy Prophet, so indicating. They actually believe it. It's called Shaqul Qamar. When the 2005 earthquake happened, our building was going like that. And almost all the faculty and students ran out and they started praying and asking it asking God to stop it. Well, look, these are people who have studied physics. They should know that it is tectonic plates which are slipping on each other. And it's not because of your evil deeds that this earthquake happened. It happened just because, I mean, we can't predict it. We can't predict it. Earthquakes, we can't predict. Whether we can. Earthquakes, maybe we'll be able to predict 100 years later. But it's plates slipping on each other. So actually, this is a bit funny, but after I came back from the earthquake regions, I got into a televised debate with some ulema who said it's because of your bad deeds that all this is happening. So they asked me, do you believe this? I said, look, I can't because I know how earthquakes happen, even though we can't predict them. Then I asked them, may I ask you? So I asked them why 90,000 people had died in a 7.1 Richter earthquake in Pakistan, and only 80 people had died in Japan in a 8.5 Richter earthquake, which was much more intense. And they said, well, the government is to blame because it didn't have building codes and all that. Then we got into an impasse. They said, do you know this is azab-e ilahi? It is the wrath of God. I said, no, I'm not sure, but can you explain to me why there are earthquakes on the moon where there is no one? At this point, the anchor called a commercial break.
Okay, we have crossed the time limit, so we have to end here. But again, as a privilege of the chairman, I'd like to ask the last question, perhaps as a way for you to round up. Throughout the conversation, it's always about how you place religion in your pursuit of science. You can go along a certain spectrum. On the far end, people believe everything is because of a religious belief. The other end, everything believes that it's because of scientific laws. And some believe that those have been dictated by God. Others could say just natural. As a Muslim scientist pursuing progress in scientific research, what is your advice to them and how they approach that in terms of their belief as a Muslim and their role as a scientist? Because I think that's what young people are grappling with. And there are, of course, influences from ulamas who say that you should only believe in one way or the other, basically, right? But I think that would be something that you could give us in terms of your insights. Yourself as a scientist, as a Muslim, who've been able to progress, achieve a lot, doing research and publication and so on and so forth. I think because we want to be able to keep ourselves informed as a Muslim and as a scientist at the same time, rather than having to choose between one over the other, basically. Could you give us your last word on that?
Islam gives you peace of mind. Islam tells you how to live your life. Islam will not tell you how the natural world works. It is absolutely and utterly essential to separate these two worlds. One of your spiritual and your mental activities, and the other of the material world. Let the two not overlap. Let it be understood that the Creator created the laws which run this universe. We have seen no example to the contrary. At least in this universe, if there are multiple universes, we cannot ever say, but in this universe, in our experience, we have never seen a violation of the laws of physics. And so keep your faith intact in the creators and the creator's invention, his law of physics. These laws of physics didn't have to be the way they are. In a parallel universe, they might be very different. We know that from various theoretical models of cosmology. And so, yeah, that's basically all that I have to say.
Thank you very much. Please give us a round of applause to Professor Hoodboy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hudbai and Professor Yaacob Ibrahim. We would now like to invite Associate Professor Mazna Muhammad on stage to present our gift of appreciation to Dr. Hudbai. Prof. Mazna, please. This gift is a hand-woven fabric from Nusa Tenggara, far eastern island of Indonesia. We have now come to the end of the event. On behalf of the Department of Malay Studies and the Syed Hussein Alatas Memorial Lecture Committee, I would like to thank Dr. Hudbai, our honorable guests, and each one of you joining us in person or online. We hope today's lecture and discussion is meaningful, and we hope to see everyone again next year. For the rest of us who are physically here, please stay on for a photo taking session. I don't know if that's still happening. Okay, maybe not. And to enjoy the lunch buffet that has been provided outside. Thank you, everyone.
Photo?
Okay, I don't think that's happening. We can.
It's not happening? No. Let me organize it. Okay, stay put. We'll go down. Cameraman, come up here and take a picture.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Yaacob.